So how this works, I'll tell you in a few minutes, but I'll just illustrate it with a disease I'm quite interested in because, again, medical science says we don't know the cause of it. And I think that it's only because we're not looking. And I'm talking about a rare condition called ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is a degenerative condition of the nervous system that leaves you very rapidly completely paralyzed. Your mind is intact, but your body's paralyzed, and in the end you can't breathe, and you die of respiratory failure. And right now there's a court case with somebody with ALS who wants the right to medical suicide. And you remember Sue Rodriguez in Victoria, who went through the same thing, and her case was rejected in the Supreme Court. So it's a very dire disease, and it carries a terrible prognosis, and most people who get it are dead within a few years. And it strikes otherwise healthy people. So a woman came to me for a second opinion about 12 years ago now, actually referred to me by my friend Gordon Neufeld, a psychologist. And her story was that she'd been diagnosed with ALS by one of the leading experts in the condition in British Columbia, or in the world actually. But she didn't want to accept the diagnosis. She wanted me to tell her that it was only stress. Well, it was ALS, but it was also stress. Her story was that she was a teacher and a vice principal at an elementary school in lower mainland of BC, in Richmond. And she found at a certain point that she could no longer hold the pen in her hands because her fingers just wouldn't obey her brain's commands. She also began to experience difficulty walking. Now you would think if that occurred to you, you would very urgently seek a medical opinion. Not her. What she did is she'd get up for months. She would get up at 5:30 every morning, slowly get herself dressed, of course, because her fingers would have trouble buttoning or pulling zippers. She'd drive herself to school, walk into school at 7:30 with her troubled gait. She would clutch the chalk in her clenched fist and painstakingly scrawl the day's lesson on the board for the students. Teach the whole day, go home, stay up late at night to prepare the next day's lesson. Everything was slow for her, you see. And next morning, get up at 5:30. And she did that until she could no longer walk. Now, or barely. Now, is she alone in this? Not at all. Everybody I've ever looked at with ALS has got exactly the same personality and the same behavior pattern, without exception. Without any exception. Doesn't matter who I interviewed or read about. In writing this book, I also looked at the medical literature. And in 1970, there was a study at Yale University Medical School about ALS patients by two psychiatrists who wrote the following. These patients, they invariably evoked admiration and respect from all staff who came into contact with them. Characteristic was their attempt to avoid asking for help. Hard, steady work without recourse to help from others was pervasive. There seemed to have been habitual denial, suppression, or isolation of fear, anxiety, and sadness. So no expression of negative emotions, so-called. Some spoke gradually of their deterioration, casually, like it didn't matter, or did so with engaging smiles. Now then I looked up the biography of Lou Gehrig, after whom the disease is named in North America. Now those of you who are old enough might know that Lou Gehrig was a great baseball player, played for the New York Yankees and in the 1930s. And he set a record for a number of hits by a New York Yankee that was only broken 2 years ago by Derek Jeter. So that record stood for 80 years. Now Gehrig set another record that stood for nearly 60 years, and that was consecutive games played. So he never missed a game. Now, did he never miss a game? And he was called the Iron Horse. Now, I didn't know about this before I read his biography. I just knew he died of his ALS. So let's look at what happened to him. Well, same thing. He was known as the Iron Horse because he never missed a game, and he didn't never miss a game because he was never sick. He was a human being. He had flus and colds like everybody else. Furthermore, being an athlete, he was injured. At one point, his hands were x-rayed, and it turned out that his fingers had been fractured 17 separate times. And each time he would play through the injury. And his teammates would describe him as grimacing like a maddened monkey in agony as he fielded the ball, but he never missed a game. And yet, when a teammate of his, a young rookie, gets sick with a flu illness and he can't play, and the manager's really upset with the guy, Gary says, "What on earth are you talking about? He's sick, he can't play." Takes the rookie home to his own house where he lived with his mother. His mother puts this rookie into Gary's own bed. Lou sleeps on the living room couch as his mother nurses his kid back to health. And he himself never missed a game until he could no longer walk. Now, this is typical with everybody with ALS. Now, are we blaming patients for causing their own illness? Well, no, we're not, because it's not deliberate. It's not deliberate. These are unconscious patterns. Let me give you an example from my personal life. So when I was 54 and my mother's 78, she was in a nursing home because she had a genetic illness called muscular dystrophy, and she could no longer walk, move her arms much. Mentally, of course, she was completely with it. She died at age 82. And by this time, she was a widow and she had to be in a nursing home. Now, one afternoon, I'm visiting her in a nursing home, and as I'm walking down the hall of the nursing home, I have a bit of a limp, just a slight limp. The reason I had a limp is because I had arthroscopic surgery that morning on one of my knees, a surgery which was minimally invasive, and they just cut out a piece of a torn cartilage, which I incurred because I used to jog on cement, and I didn't pay attention to the fact that it hurt jogging on cement. I missed a lecture in medical school about the relationship between pain and tissue damage, so that I didn't know this was a bad thing, so I continued to jog on cement, tore cartilage, surgery that morning, that afternoon, a bit of a limp. When I get to my mother's room, I open the door, and my limp disappears. And I walk into her room with a perfectly normal gait, greet her, we visit. I walk out again in a balanced way, and then I close the door behind me, and I start limping again. Now, what do you suppose I was doing? Anyone? Taking care of her, not wanting her to worry, yeah. But here's the thing about my mother. She was 78. She had survived the Second World War. She had survived the Nazi genocide, the death of her parents in Auschwitz. She survived communist dictatorship, the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, emigration to Canada with 2 adolescent boys and my father, the birth of a child in Canada when she was 39 in a new country, the whole immigration experience. Do you think she could have handled and she was a mentally and emotionally very strong person, do you think she could have handled the fact that her middle-aged son had a bit of a limp the afternoon of the arthroscopic surgery? Had I thought about it, I would not have suppressed my limp, but the point is I didn't think about it. It went back to my very first year of life. When I was 2 months old, when the German army marched into Budapest, and my mother phones the pediatrician to say, "Would you please come and see Gabor, because he's crying all the time," the day after the invasion. And the pediatrician says, "Of course I will come, but I should tell you, all my Jewish babies are crying." Now, what do you think that was about? What did I, as a 2-month-old, know about Nazis or Hitler or genocide? What was I reacting to? Stress. The stress of my mother. Infants pick up on the stress of their mothers. And the infant learns very quickly that if the mother is so stressed already, that if I add more stress to it, that might threaten my relationship with her, because she'll be even more unhappy. Then the infant will learn to suppress their own pain, simply to maintain their relationship. Now, that's not a mother's desire ever to give that message to an infant, but we do automatically and unconsciously. That's just how it works. And that becomes the memory, and I'll talk to you more about those memories later. But it becomes a memory without recall. I don't recall that time in my life, but the memory is in my body. And my friend Servas, who works with bodies a lot, he sees the body memories in the way people stand, or they hold themselves, or the way they walk. And we hold these memories in our bodies, and we're not even aware of them up here because there's no conscious recollection. So that suppression of my limp was a body memory of what I had to do to maintain my relationship with my mother. Now, the woman with ALS, the teacher, she was an adopted child. And shortly after the adoption, guess what? Her mother gets pregnant. And the biological child was the mother's center of attention. And the adopted child, from an early age on, learned, or at least perceived, that she wasn't loved and accepted and celebrated like the biological child was, and hence she worked to make herself lovable. And how do you work to make yourself lovable? By suppressing your own feelings, by always being nice, by always taking care, and always ignoring your own needs. And it was purely unconscious. This is her coping patterns since she was a small child. She did not do it deliberately. And Lou Gehrig's father was an alcoholic. And if any of you grew up in homes where there's alcoholism, you know how it works. Is that the children, or one of the children, becomes the caregiver to the parents, emotionally or even physically sometimes. And that then becomes your personality. That then becomes how you live your life, because you think that's who you are. Because how we are as kids, we think that's who we are. That's not who we are, but that's what we come to believe, and that's how we behave then. And that's what creates these patterns. So there's nobody here to be blamed here. Nobody here to be blamed. It's just how it works. Now, why do these patterns translate into illness? That's because, as traditional medicine has always understood, and as Western science has now confirmed, mind and body are inseparable. So if you look at the important systems in the body and the brain, they're completely connected. So that the emotional centers in the brain are connected to the immune system and the hormonal apparatus and the nervous system. Now, the emotional centers in your brain have one major role to play to keep you alive. Now, what is the biggest need of the newborn, emotionally speaking, and even physically speaking? Is attachment to the adults. Without that attachment, we don't survive. You can see that. This is true, of course, of baby birds and baby mammals, but especially of human beings, because we're the most underdeveloped and the least mature and the most helpless for the longest period of time of any creature on earth. And I'll say much more about that in my talk on ADHD. Now, that means that our brains are wired for attachment. We're wired to attach. Big centers in our brains are dedicated to maintaining our attachment relationships. That's our biggest need. Those emotional centers in the brain are connected with the nervous system, because the nervous system warns us when our attachment needs are not being met, and then we cry. And then we get stressed. That's the that's the hormonal apparatus. And all that has an impact on our immunity. Because it turns out that all these systems, the hormonal apparatus, the immune system, nervous system, and the emotional centers in the brain, are connected by the nervous system into one giant electrical grid. Fibers of the nervous system connect them all together. So that anything that happens in one aspect of that system happens in the other aspects. So they're connected. So that electrical fibers or nervous fibers from the brain go to the spleen, where the red cells are stored, or to the bone marrow where they're manufactured, or to the thymus gland in the neck where immune cells mature, and back up to the brain. So there's a constant neurological communication that's going on in our systems 24/7, every second, every millisecond. That's one form of connection. The other connection is by means of chemical messengers that each of these systems secrete into the circulation. which then travel to the other organs, so that the brain reads what's happening in the body, and the body reads what's happening in the brain. So it turns out that the immune cells in our circulation can manufacture every hormone that the brain can manufacture. So the immune cells in your circulation are talking to the brain and listening to the brain. That's the second connection. The third connection is the brain-gut connection. So let me ask you this question, and I'll ask for a show of hands. If you've had the following experience, please just put your hand up. That is, that you had a powerful gut feeling about something, and you ignored it, and you were sorry afterwards. Okay, if you've had that experience, put your hand up. Okay, just about everybody here. Now, why is it that the gut is so much brighter than the brain is? Not the brain, but the mind. Than the intellect, I should say. It's very simple. Because the gut is connected to the brain, in fact, the gut sends many more connections to the brain than vice versa. When the gut receives messages from the brain, it reads them and it magnifies them and sends them back up to the brain. So the gut feelings tell you the whole picture. Your thoughts only tell you a small part of the picture. So people who had a stroke in the part of the brain where language is processed, these are called aphasiacs. They're much better able to tell when somebody's lying than the average person who can understand speech. Why do you suppose? Since they don't understand the words, what are they paying attention to? They got feelings, which read the body language of the person, the facial expression, the congruity of the mouth and the eyes. Is it really, when the person is smiling, is it just a mouth out smiling? Have you seen the parliamentary debate on CBC? And when the politicians stand up and they smile, they're grinning here, there's nothing up here. It makes you uncomfortable to look at it. Anybody with gut feelings would turn the TV off. Now, there's another large group of people, another large group of human beings who read gut feelings accurately and respond to them. And what do we call those people? Children, small children. Young babies don't listen to words, they don't even understand them. But they react unerringly and intuitively to gut feelings. Now guess what? When you put your hand up and told me that you've had strong gut feelings that you've ignored and you were sorry afterwards because you believed your intellect rather than your guts, you told me the story of your childhood. And the story of your childhood is that you were born with the gut feelings intact and connected completely. But at some point something happened to you. At some point you got the message that in order to survive and to be acceptable, you have to suppress your gut feelings. Because here's how it works. Children have two needs. Infants, anybody, any human being. We have two basic needs. And the more immature we are, the more important the first need becomes. And that's for attachment. And attachment means that connection with another human being for the purpose of being taken care of. That's an absolute need of the small child. Can't live without it. Impossible. So that's one large need. Another need, however, we have to function as full human beings is to be authentic. Authentic means that we know who we are, what we feel, are able to express it, and able to honor it in our behavior. So we have the need for attachment, and we have the need for authenticity. So far, so good. But what happens if in order to attach, we have to suppress our authenticity? Because our parents can't handle who we are. Because they can't handle our anger as 2-year-olds. Because they can't handle our expression of our needs. Because they're too stressed. They're too needy. Like my mother was in that terrible situation. Then we suppress who we are. We suppress our authenticity. And we suppress our awareness of our gut feelings because the expression of them would bring us into conflict with our caregivers and threaten our attachments. And so our problem as adults is that a lot of our behaviors are still coming out of our need to attach. So we're still behaving like little kids who need to attach and need to be liked and need to be accepted and approved of at the expense of our authenticity. And that, people, is what makes us sick.